true courage is rarely a choice we make with time to think. It's the decision that happens in the space between one heartbeat and the next, when fear hasn't yet caught up to the body. The bullet that tore through the New York evening wasn't meant for Sharon Smith. It was precision engineered for the elimination of 2 children, heirs to a criminal operation that spanned from Seoul to Manhattan. Sharon didn't know their names, their heritage, or that their father was the kind of man who could erase her existence with a phone call. She only understood one thing with absolute clarity: hesitation costs lives. So she didn't hesitate. And in that single, irreversible moment, she became something more dangerous than any assassin, more disruptive than any rival. She became the living proof that Kang Min-jae's entire philosophy was wrong. You're here, but you haven't subscribed? That's wild. Fix that. Comment where you're from so I know you're real. Tonight's not about violence. It's about a woman everyone underestimated becoming untouchable. Sharon Smith stood between twins and a gun, and broke a monster's entire world. Let's begin. The dinner service at Beck and Park was a carefully choreographed performance of crystal glasses, whispered orders, and the kind of silence that only money could buy. For Sharon Smith, it was just another Thursday where her tips might cover the electric bill and her supervisor's passive-aggressive comments about moving faster were starting to sound like threats. Table 6 needs attention, Sharon. And the VIP section still hasn't been served water, Mr. Chen added, checking his watch with theatrical impatience. On it, Sharon said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders like weights. She grabbed the silver pitcher and navigated the maze of tables. The restaurant catered to Manhattan's elite, the kind of people who spent more on wine than Sharon earned in a month. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different. Heavier. Sharon approached the corner booth, the one positioned with sight lines to every exit. It was occupied by a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. Kang Min-jae. Even Sharon, who deliberately avoided the news and kept her head down, knew who he was. The papers called him an international logistics consultant. The Korean community whispered his name with fear and respect. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that made you forget to breathe, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see through pretense like glass. But it was the coldness radiating from him that made the air around his table feel 10 degrees colder. Tonight, though, the most feared man in New York was losing an argument with a bowl of soup. Sitting across from him were 2 identical 7-year-old boys, Ji-hoon and Min-ho, dressed in miniature designer suits that made them look like tiny executives. They stared at their food with identical expressions of suspicion. "You need to eat," Kang said. His voice was low, controlled, but edged with something unfamiliar. Frustration, maybe. Or helplessness. "It's too hot," one twin said. "And it smells weird," the other added. "It's mayak guk. Your grandmother made the recipe herself." Kang rubbed his temple, a gesture that seemed completely out of place on a man who reportedly controlled shipping routes across 3 continents. Sharon stepped forward, pouring ice water into their glasses with practiced efficiency. "Actually," she said softly, causing Kang's head to snap up, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that should have made her step back. But she didn't. "If you blow on the soup like this," she demonstrated gently, "it cools down faster." "And the smell? That's seaweed. It's what gives mermaids their power in the ocean." The twins' eyes widened. "Mermaids are real?" one asked. Sharon smiled. "What do you think?" Kang stared at her. Really looked at her. He saw the frayed cuffs on her uniform blouse, the shadows under her brown eyes, the hands reddened from industrial soap and double shifts. But he also saw something else. A spine that didn't bend. She wasn't afraid of him. And that was unusual. "Do it," Kong said, his tone dismissive but his eyes lingering on her face a moment too long. For the next 40 minutes, Sharon attended their table. She refilled drinks before they asked. She brought extra napkins when one twin spilled. She treated Kong Min-jae not as a crime boss, but as an exhausted single father trying to get through a meal without a meltdown. When the check came, Kong placed a black card on the leather folder without looking at it. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. Clipped and formal. But it was more than he'd said to anyone else in the restaurant. "Of course, Mr. Kong," Sharon replied. "They're wonderful boys." "They are exhausting," he corrected, though something that might have been pride flickered across his expression. He stood, buttoning his jacket with precision. The movement triggered an immediate response. 2 men in dark suits who'd been stationed near the bar stood in unison, his security detail, moving toward the door to clear the path. "Let's go, boys," Kong said, placing protective hands on his son's shoulders as he guided them toward the exit. Sharon picked up the check folder. Inside, the tip was $800. Her breath caught. $800. That was her rent. Her overdue phone bill. Groceries for 2 weeks. She clutched the folder and ran toward the door to thank him, her practical brain momentarily overridden by shock and gratitude. She pushed through the restaurant's glass doors into the cool New York evening. The valet was bringing around a black armored SUV that looked more like a military vehicle than a family car. Kong was herding the twins toward the curb, momentarily distracted as he adjusted Ji-hoon's collar. That's when Sharon saw it. Across the street, a dark sedan's window descended. Not all the way. Just enough for the barrel of a weapon to emerge, catching the streetlight at an angle that made it gleam like a blade. Time crystallized into something thick and slow. The security guards were scanning traffic to the left. The car was on the right. Kong was looking down at his sons, his attention divided between their safety and their comfort. No one saw it. No one but her. "Get down!" Sharon screamed. The sound ripped from her throat, raw and primal. She didn't think. She dropped the folder. She didn't calculate survival odds or consider consequences. She ran. She covered the 15 feet between the door and the family in 4 seconds flat, her cheap sneakers slapping against pavement. Kong began to turn at her scream, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon she somehow knew would be holstered at his ribs, but he was moving through molasses, too slow, always too slow. The twins were exposed. The first shot came with a sound like a branch snapping underwater. Sharon threw herself forward in a diving tackle that had more desperation than technique. She wrapped both arms around the twins' small bodies and brought them down to the concrete, covering them with every inch of her frame she could manage. Pop, pop, pop. The sounds were wrong. Too quiet. Too polite for what they meant. Sharon felt something massive and hot slam into her shoulder. Not pain, not yet. Just force. Impact. The air punched from her lungs. Then the world detonated. Cover. Get them to the vehicle now. Kang's voice transformed into something feral, barely human. He had his weapon drawn in a single fluid motion, firing controlled shots at the fleeing sedan, glass shattering, metal sparking, but the car was already accelerating away, disappearing into Manhattan traffic like smoke. Kong holstered his weapon and spun. His heart was slamming against his ribs, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his 20s. Since he'd learned to kill the parts of himself that felt fear. Appa. Ji-hoon was crying. Kang's eyes found the scene on the sidewalk, and something in his chest cracked. Sharon lay sprawled across his children. She wasn't moving. Her white uniform blouse was blooming with red across the shoulder and upper back, spreading like spilled wine, too much red, too fast. "Boys, are you hurt? Look at me. Were you hit?" Kong dropped to his knees, his $1,000 suit dragging through grime and broken glass. He pulled the twins out from beneath her with shaking hands. They were trembling, terrified, covered in blood. But it wasn't theirs. "She's bleeding, Appa," Minho whispered, his small voice breaking. "The nice lady is bleeding," Ji-hoon sobbed. Kong shoved the boys toward his head of security, a mountain of a man named Taeyong. Armored car. Compound. Direct route. Do not stop. Go. Taeyong scooped up both twins and disappeared into the SUV. The engine roared. Tires screamed. Kong was alone on the blood-streaked pavement with a dying woman who'd saved his children for no reason he could comprehend. He turned her over with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor ever whispered about him. Her face was pale, her brown eyes fluttering, losing focus. Shock. She was going into shock. "Hey," Kong said, his voice impossibly steady despite the chaos ringing in his ears. "Stay with me." Sharon's eyes found his. She tried to speak but only managed to whisper. "The boys." "Safe," Kong said. "Because of you." Her eyes closed. "No. No, stay awake," Kong commanded, his hand pressing against her wound, blood immediately soaking through his fingers. Hot. Slick. Too much. Ambulance is coming. Stay with me. That's an order. Sharon's lips curved into the faintest smile. Don't take orders, well, she breathed. And then she was gone. Not dead. Not yet. But unconscious, her body going limp in his arms. Kong pulled her against his chest as sirens wailed in the distance, his mind racing through protocols, damage control, asset protection. But underneath all that training, all that calculation, was a single thought he couldn't suppress. Who saves someone else's children when they have nothing to gain? He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from. He didn't know why she'd moved when everyone else froze. But Kong Min-jae, who'd built an empire on understanding human motivation, suddenly realized he'd just encountered someone whose actions made no sense within his carefully constructed worldview. Someone who'd broken every rule he thought governed human behavior. Someone who might be more dangerous to everything he believed than any bullet ever could be. Sharon woke to the smell of antiseptic and the distant beeping of machines she couldn't name. Her shoulder burned with a pain that felt molecular, like her body was being rebuilt from the inside out. The ceiling above her was cream-colored, expensive, unfamiliar. This wasn't a hospital. You're awake. The voice came from her left, accented and controlled. Kong Min-jae sat in a leather chair that looked like it cost more than her car, his suit replaced by a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Where? Sharon's throat felt raw. My physician extracted the bullet 3 hours ago. You're in the recovery suite at my estate. He said it like it was reasonable. Like she'd agreed to this. I need to go home. Sharon tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her shoulder, forcing her back down. Your apartment has been cleared. Your belongings are in the east wing. Kong stood, moving to pour water from a crystal pitcher. You'll stay here until the threat is neutralized. You can't just, Sharon stared at him. You moved my things? Without asking? You were unconscious. He offered her the water with a steadiness that suggested he saw no problem with his logic. Your landlord was cooperative once the situation was explained. Sharon's hands trembled as she took the glass. Cooperative. That word meant so many things in Kang's world, none of them good. The boys? She asked quietly. Something shifted in Kang's expression. Softened, maybe. Safe. Traumatized, but unharmed. They've been asking about you. Sharon drank the water slowly, her mind racing through implications. She'd saved 2 children and woken up in a gilded cage. Her apartment was gone. Her autonomy had been protected right out of existence. How long do I have to stay? Kang's jaw tightened. Until I determine it's safe. And if I leave anyway? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kong leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that should have been threatening. But Sharon saw something else beneath the control. Confusion. Frustration. He genuinely didn't understand why she wasn't grateful. You took a bullet for my sons, he said carefully, each word measured. That creates obligations. For you or for me? Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Kong stood abruptly, buttoning his cuffs with sharp, precise movements. Rest. We'll discuss this when you're stronger. He left before Sharon could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded remarkably like a lock. Sharon stared at the ceiling, her shoulder throbbing in time with her heartbeat. She'd survived the bullet. But as she took in the expensive medical equipment, the designer furniture, the complete absence of her own choices, she realized something that made her chest tighten with a different kind of fear. Surviving the assassination might have been the easy part. The estate was a masterpiece of architecture and isolation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens that stretched toward walls Sharon couldn't see but knew were there. Her room, the East Wing Suite, as the housekeeper called it, was larger than her entire former apartment. Silk sheets. Marble bathroom. A closet full of clothes in her exact size that she'd never chosen. Every luxury imaginable, except the ability to leave. Ms. Smith, your breakfast. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Cho, entered without knocking. Behind her, Sharon caught a glimpse of a man in a dark suit stationed in the hallway. I can eat in the kitchen, Sharon said. Mr. Kong prefers. I wasn't asking Mr. Kang's preference. Mrs. Cho's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. The kitchen is on the lower level. I'll show you. Sharon's shoulder protested as she stood, but she refused to wince. Small rebellions mattered when larger ones were impossible. She made it halfway down the marble staircase before she heard them. She's awake. Appa, the mermaid lady, is awake. Ji-hoon and Min-ho appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still in pajamas, their faces lighting up with uncomplicated joy. They rushed toward her before anyone could stop them. Careful of her shoulder, Kang's voice cut through the moment. He emerged from a side corridor, already dressed for business, his expression unreadable. But the twins didn't slow down. They reached Sharon carefully, almost reverently, their small hands gripping the fabric of her borrowed robe. "You're okay," Minho whispered. "We thought you might disappear," Ji-hoon added quietly. The weight of that statement settled in Sharon's chest. Disappear? What kind of childhood taught boys that people vanished without warning? "I'm okay," Sharon said, kneeling despite the pain so she could meet their eyes. "A little sore, but okay. How are you two?" They talked over each other, words tumbling out about nightmares and bad dreams and how Taeyong let them sleep in the security room because they were scared. Their hands never left her robe, like they were anchoring themselves to something solid. Sharon glanced up to find Kong watching from 10 feet away. His expression was complicated, something between analysis and discomfort. Around him, 2 guards stood at attention, Mrs. Cho waited with rigid efficiency, and a man in an expensive suit held a tablet, probably scheduling Kang's day down to the minute. The twins didn't acknowledge any of them. Their entire focus remained on Sharon. "Do you want to have breakfast with us?" Ji-hoon asked. "Please," Minho added. Sharon looked past them to Kong. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He wasn't used to being irrelevant in his own home. "If your father says it's okay," Sharon said carefully. "Appa?" Both boys turned to him with expressions that weren't quite fear but weren't comfort either. Expectation, maybe. Or habit. "Of course," Kong said, his tone controlled. "Mrs. Cho, breakfast in the solarium." 4-3. The twins cheered, their relief palpable. As they pulled Sharon toward the solarium, chattering about showing her the koi pond and the tree house, Sharon caught one more glimpse of Kang's face. He looked like a man watching something he couldn't control, couldn't understand, and couldn't stop. And Sharon realized with sinking clarity, gratitude in the hands of powerful men didn't come with expiration dates. It came with expectations. With obligations that multiplied quietly until you forgot what freedom felt like. She'd saved the twins from a bullet. Now she had to figure out how to save herself from their father's protection. Sharon noticed the pattern on her 3rd day at the estate. The security rotations changed without warning. Taeyong's jaw tightened whenever a particular guard, a man named Sung-ho, entered the room. During a conference call Kong took in the study, she heard him switch from Korean to English mid-sentence, as if he no longer trusted who might be listening. Small fractures in a system built on absolute control. "You're observant." Kang's voice startled her as she stood by the window, watching Sung-ho speak quietly into his phone near the garden's edge. "I notice when people lie," Sharon said simply. "He touches his ear before he speaks. Like he's getting instructions from somewhere else." Kang's expression darkened. He'd noticed too, then. "Stay away from him." "I stay away from everyone here." Sharon turned to face him. "Your guards make sure of that." Before Kong could respond, a crash echoed from upstairs, followed by screaming. They both moved. Sharon reached the twins' room first, ignoring the fire in her shoulder. Minho was sobbing on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass from a broken lamp. Ji-hoon stood frozen against the wall, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Don't move," Kong commanded, already pulling out his phone. "I'll get." "Stop," Sharon said quietly. She knelt beside Minho, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey! Can you hear me?" Minho's sobs were frantic, hyperventilating. "I need you to breathe with me, okay? In through your nose." Sharon demonstrated, exaggerating the motion. "Out through your mouth." Like blowing out birthday candles. Minho tried, failed, hiccuped. That's okay. Try again. I'm right here. You're safe. It took 3 minutes. 3 minutes of patient breathing, of Sharon's steady presence, before Minho's sobs quieted to hiccups. Ji-hoon slowly slid down the wall to sit beside his brother. Bad dream? Sharon asked gently. The car, Ji-hoon whispered. The loud noises. Minho thought he heard it again. It was just thunder, Minho said miserably. But I thought they came back. Sharon glanced at Kong, who stood in the doorway looking utterly out of his depth. This wasn't a problem he could solve with money or threats. Your brain is trying to keep you safe, Sharon explained to the twins. It remembers scary things so it can warn you. But sometimes it warns you even when there's no danger. That's normal. It means your brain is doing its job, even if it makes mistakes. How do we make it stop? Minho asked. We don't stop it. We teach it the difference between real danger and remembered danger. It takes practice. Will you help us practice? Ji-hoon asked. Sharon looked at Kong. His expression was complicated, something between gratitude and resentment. She was teaching his children things he should have taught them. Things he didn't know how to teach. Yes, Sharon said. I'll help. After the twins finally fell asleep, Kong found Sharon in the hallway. Thank you, he said stiffly. They need a therapist, not a waitress. They need someone they trust. Kang's voice was rough. That list is short. Sharon studied his face. The danger isn't outside these walls anymore, is it? Kang's silence was answer enough. The enemy was already inside. Had probably been inside for a long time. And Kong Min-jae, who'd built an empire on fear and loyalty, was finally learning what Sharon had always known. Fear doesn't create loyalty. It creates people waiting for their chance to betray you. The fire alarm didn't wake Sharon. The silence did. In 3 weeks at the estate, she'd learned its rhythms. Guards changed shifts at 2 a.m. with military precision. The twins' nightmares usually hit around 3 a.m. The kitchen staff arrived at 5 a.m. At 2:47 a.m., she heard nothing. No footsteps. No radio chatter. No distant murmur of Korean from the security station. Sharon was out of bed before she fully understood why. The hallway was empty. The guard who should have been stationed outside her door was gone. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, but the alarm itself was silent, disabled, not malfunctioning. She moved toward the twins' room on instinct, then stopped herself. Think. This isn't the street. This is planned. The twins' room was the obvious target. Which meant someone would be waiting there. But the estate had a secondary staircase, the one the staff used. If she could reach it, she could circle around, come at the room from the opposite direction. Sharon's shoulder screamed as she moved, but she ignored it. She'd made it halfway down the staff corridor when she heard it, a voice speaking Korean, terse and urgent, coming from near the twins' door. Sung-ho. The guard with the wandering loyalty. Sharon's heart hammered against her ribs. She could run. Find Kong. Get real help. But that would take time. And time was the one thing the twins didn't have. This wasn't instinct. This was choice. Sharon grabbed a metal serving tray from the hall table and slammed it against the marble floor. The sound exploded through the silence like a gunshot. Fire! The kitchen's on fire, she screamed in English, then repeated it badly in Korean, her pronunciation atrocious but loud. Help! Someone help! Doors opened. Confused voices called out. Sharon kept screaming, kept banging, creating chaos where there had been calculated silence. She saw Sung-ho emerge from the twins' wing, his face twisted with rage. He had a gun. His eyes locked on Sharon, and she saw the decision form. She was a witness. A complication. Sharon didn't run. She stepped into the center of the hallway, making herself the target, the obstacle between him and his escape route. The twins are awake, she said clearly. They'll remember your face. Sung-ho hesitated. 1 second. 2. Then Taeyong appeared from the main staircase, weapon drawn, with 4 other guards behind him. Kang was right behind them, still pulling on a shirt, his own gun already in his hand. Sung-ho's weapon clattered to the floor. The estate erupted into controlled chaos. Guards securing rooms. Radio chatter. The twins' door opening, revealing them frightened but untouched. Kang moved past the subdued traitor without a glance, his entire focus on Sharon. You should have run, he said quietly. I did run, Sharon replied. Toward them. Not away. Kang stared at her, and Sharon watched something fundamental shift behind his eyes. On the street, he could have rationalized her actions as impulse, as shock, as a single moment of unthinking heroism. But this was different. This was deliberate. Calculated. A choice made with full knowledge of the cost. Why? The word came out raw, almost desperate. Sharon looked past him to where the twins stood in their doorway, clinging to each other. Because hesitation costs lives, she said simply. You taught me that. But they both knew that wasn't quite true. She'd always known it. She just finally found people worth proving it for. Sung-ho talked within an hour. Men who built careers on loyalty usually broke quickly when that loyalty wasn't returned. The name he gave made Kang's blood turn to ice. Park Jin-woo. His logistics coordinator. A man who'd worked beside him for 8 years. A man who'd held Ji-hoon as a baby. A man Kang had trusted with shipment routes, financial transfers, and access to the estate. Someone ordinary. Someone close. Burn it down, Taeyong said as they stood in Kang's study, the city lights stretching below them like a circuit board. Every contact Park Jin-woo had. Every person he spoke to. We purge the organization, rebuild from scratch. Kang's hand tightened on his glass. The logical part of his brain agreed. Tighten control. Eliminate uncertainty. Rule through fear renewed. But he kept seeing Sharon in the hallway, making herself a target. Kept hearing her say, I ran toward them, not away. That's not a solution, Sharon's voice came from the doorway. That's just a faster way to create the next betrayal. Both men turned. Sharon stood there in borrowed clothes, her arm in a sling, looking small and exhausted and utterly unintimidated. This is not your concern, Kang said carefully. You made it my concern when you moved my life here without asking. Sharon stepped into the room. I've been watching your organization for weeks. You want to know why Park betrayed you? Greed, Taeyong said flatly. Fear, Sharon corrected. Everyone here is terrified. Your guards are afraid of making mistakes. Your staff is afraid of being noticed. Your children are afraid of disappointing you. Fear doesn't create loyalty, Mr. Kang. It creates people waiting for an exit. Kang's jaw tightened. You know nothing about my world. I know that you can't keep me safe by keeping me prisoner. Sharon's voice was steady, clear. And you can't protect your sons by teaching them that power means control. They're already learning to hide from you instead of trust you. The words landed like physical blows. What would you have me do? Kang's voice was dangerously quiet. Trust everyone? Eliminate accountability? I'd have you ask why Park felt he couldn't bring his grievances to you directly. I'd have you redistribute power instead of hoarding it. I'd have you lead through respect instead of fear. Sharon held his gaze. Or keep doing what you're doing and wait for the next person you trust to put a gun to your children's heads. Silence stretched between them. Taeyong looked like he wanted to remove Sharon from the room. Kang looked like he was watching his entire worldview crack down the middle. Finally, Kang spoke. Set up a meeting. Department heads. All of them. His voice was rough. We're restructuring. Starting with transparency in decision-making and ending with, he exhaled slowly, ending with accountability that runs both ways. Taeyong's eyes widened. Sir, that will weaken your position. No, Kang said, looking at Sharon. It will strengthen my integrity. There's a difference. Sharon nodded once, then turned to leave. Ms. Smith, Kang called. Your apartment. The one I had cleared. I'll have your belongings returned to it. And the guards outside your door will be removed. You're free to leave whenever you choose. Sharon paused. And the twins? We'll know, Kang said quietly, that you stayed because you wanted to. Not because you had to. For the first time since the bullet, Sharon smiled. 3 weeks after Sung-ho's arrest, Sharon found Ji-hoon sitting alone in the library, a book unopened in his lap. Not a good story? She asked. It's about a king, Ji-hoon said quietly. He wins all his battles but everyone's afraid of him. Even his son. Sharon sat beside him. Through the window, she could see Min-ho in the garden with Taeyong, laughing as they fed the koi. The sound carried, clear and uncomplicated. That sounds lonely, Sharon said. Do you think Appa is lonely? The question was so direct, so perceptive, that Sharon took a moment to answer. I think powerful people often are. They forget how to let others close. Min-ho says we should be stronger. So Appa doesn't have to worry. Ji-hoon's voice was small. But I don't know how to be strong. Sharon's chest tightened. She'd seen this pattern before, children interpreting fear as love, control as care, emotional distance as a challenge they needed to overcome. Can I tell you a secret? Sharon said. Being strong doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being honest about what you feel. But Appa never. Your father is learning, Sharon interrupted gently. Sometimes adults need practice too. She didn't know Kang was standing in the doorway until he spoke. May I join you? Both Sharon and Ji-hoon startled. Kang looked different, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled. Almost human. Appa, Ji-hoon said carefully, are you angry? The question clearly hit Kang like a physical blow. No. Why would I be angry? You have your business face. Kang's expression shifted through several emotions Sharon couldn't quite name. He moved slowly into the room and sat in the chair across from them, deliberately lowering himself to their level. "I'm not angry," he said, his voice softer than Sharon had ever heard it. "I'm thinking." "About what?" Ji-hoon asked. Kang looked at Sharon, then back to his son. "About what kind of father I want to be. About what I want you to remember when you're grown." "I remember you came for us," Ji-hoon said. "After the bad men. You always come. But do you feel safe telling me when you're afraid?" Kang asked. The vulnerability in his voice was raw, unguarded. "Or do you hide it because you think I need you to be strong?" Ji-hoon's silence was answer enough. Kang closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were bright with something that might have been tears. "I was raised to believe fear was weakness," he said quietly. "I was wrong. Fear is information. And hiding it from each other makes us weak, not strong. Miss Sharon says our brains try to protect us," Ji-hoon offered. "Miss Sharon is very wise." Kang looked at her, and Sharon saw genuine gratitude there. "Wiser than I've been." Over the next hour, something shifted. Kang asked questions instead of giving commands. Ji-hoon spoke without calculating his words first. Min-ho joined them, and for the first time, Sharon watched Kang laugh, really laugh, at his son's terrible joke about a fish. Later, as Sharon stood to leave, Kang walked with her to the hallway. "They'll remember this," he said quietly. "Not the danger. Not the fear. They'll remember the moment their father stopped pretending to be invincible." "Yes," Sharon agreed. "I've been teaching them to survive my world," Kang said, his voice rough. "When I should have been teaching them to be better than it." Sharon saw the weight of that realization in his face. The understanding that protection wasn't about building walls, but about building people strong enough to choose their own paths. "It's not too late," she said. Kang nodded slowly. "Because of you." "No," Sharon corrected gently. "Because you chose to listen." The envelope sat on Sharon's breakfast plate, cream-colored and official-looking. Inside, a lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, first and last month paid. A bank account statement showing $30,000, exactly what she would have earned in 2 years at the restaurant. A phone number for a security consultant, should she ever need assistance. And a brief handwritten note in precise English: "You are free to go. Thank you for everything. K." Sharon's hands trembled as she set down the papers. "He left for Seoul this morning," Taeyong said from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Business he's been avoiding. He wanted this handle before he returned. He didn't say goodbye to me." Sharon's voice came out smaller than she intended. "He said," Taeyong paused, uncomfortable with emotional translation. "He said if he asked you to stay, it wouldn't be a choice anymore. It would be pressure disguised as a request." Sharon looked down at the papers. Freedom. Real freedom. An apartment she could afford, money to rebuild her life, and distance from a world that had almost killed her twice. She could leave today. Go back to a life where bullets weren't a possibility and children didn't have nightmares about car windows rolling down. "The boys don't know yet," Taeyong added. "Mr. Kang wanted you to decide without guilt," Sharon finished. "Without them being a reason I felt obligated to stay." "Yes." Sharon stood, walking to the window. In the garden below, Ji-hoon and Min-ho were having a water gun fight, their laughter carrying up through the glass. They looked like normal children. Happy. Healing. They were healing because someone had stayed long enough to show them what safety without fear looked like. But that someone didn't have to be her. Kong could hire therapists, specialists, people trained for this. Except children didn't trust credentials. They trusted consistency. Sharon thought about the twins asking if she'd disappear. About Ji-hoon finally admitting his fears to his father. About Min-ho sleeping through the night without screaming. She thought about Kong learning to ask instead of command. About an organization restructuring around respect instead of terror. About small changes that might ripple into something larger. She could walk away from all of it. Should walk away, probably. It wasn't her responsibility to fix a broken man's relationship with his children or reform a criminal empire from the inside. But then again, it had never been her responsibility to step between those twins and a bullet either. Sharon picked up the papers and walked to Taeyong. "Tell Mr. Kong I'll stay. Not for the money, I don't want the apartment or the account. I'll stay because I'm choosing to. Because the twins need consistency, and because..." She paused, searching for the right words, "because I've never been in a place that was willing to change when I asked it to." Taeyong's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "He'll want to pay you properly. As their caregiver. Then we'll negotiate terms," Sharon said. "Like equals. When he gets back." "When he gets back," Taeyong agreed. Sharon looked out at the twins again. Freedom wasn't just about being able to leave. Sometimes it was about being able to stay, and knowing the difference. 6 months after the bullet, Sharon stood outside Beck and Park restaurant with 2 7-year-old boys who were arguing about dumplings. "Mandu are better steamed," Ji-hoon insisted. "Pan-fried are crispier," Min-ho countered. "We'll get both," Sharon said, smiling at their newest ritual, Thursday dinner at the restaurant where everything had started. Kong emerged from the black SUV, no longer armored, with only Taeyong accompanying them. The security had shifted from fortress to reasonable precaution. The organization had shifted from empire to enterprise. Neither transformation had been easy. "Ready?" Kong asked, and Sharon noted that he was asking, not announcing. "Always," she replied. They entered through the same doors. Sat in the same section. But everything was different. Mr. Chen, now the owner after Kong had quietly provided the capital, greeted them warmly. The restaurant had become a twice-monthly tradition, Sharon's insistence that the twins see their father in ordinary moments, not just behind the walls of power. "Miss Sharon," Ji-hoon tugged her sleeve, "can we tell Appa about the science project?" "It's your project," Sharon said. "You tell him." She watched as Ji-hoon explained his volcano experiment with unself-conscious enthusiasm, watched Kong listen with full attention, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than testing for weakness. "You're proud of them," Sharon observed quietly as the twins debated which dessert to order. "I'm learning to show it," Kong corrected. "There's a difference." His organization now operated with department heads who could disagree with him in meetings. His home had staff who could voice concerns without fear. His children had a father who admitted when he was wrong. None of it was perfect. But all of it was possible. "I've been thinking," Kong said, his voice carefully casual, "about expanding the caregiver role. Making it official. With benefits, autonomy, and boundaries," Sharon finished. "We've discussed this. I'm their caregiver, not their mother. I'm your employee, not your possession. Those lines matter." "They do," Kong agreed. Then, softer, you matter. Sharon met his eyes. Something had been building between them for months, something neither had named or acted on. Respect had become understanding. Understanding had become something deeper. But not yet. Maybe not ever. And that was okay. The boys matter, Sharon said. Everything else is secondary. Kang nodded, accepting the boundary even as his expression suggested he hoped those priorities might someday shift. The twins returned to the table with their dessert choice, and the conversation shifted to weekend plans and homework and the ordinary concerns of a family learning to be one. Outside, Manhattan continued its chaos. Somewhere in the city, deals were made, power was traded, and violence simmered beneath expensive suits. But here, in this moment, two children laughed without fear. A father listened without demanding. And a woman who'd once thrown herself between twins and a gun sat peacefully, knowing that the hardest part of courage wasn't the single dramatic act. It was showing up, day after day, choosing principle over convenience, choosing consistency over control. Sharon Smith had stepped between Kang Min-jae's twins and a bullet not because she was fearless, but because she understood something the most powerful man in the room had forgotten. Sometimes the most dangerous force in a violent world isn't the person who fights back. It's the person who refuses to become it. And in refusing, shows everyone else that another way is possible. Real courage isn't one heroic moment. It's choosing principle over convenience, again and again, until it becomes who you are. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not because they're fearless, but because they refuse to let fear choose for them.